talking points and some questions to address, and I would encourage you all to, as Mega said, just pop your questions in the chat line and we'll do our very best to try and help. Again, here we find ourselves with a new reality, and if you're like me, at the early stages of this whole crisis, you probably didn't really think it was going to become what it has actually become. And now we find ourselves with the same kind of scenario or feelings that the general population, world population, must have felt during things like the Spanish flu epidemic or the First and Second World Wars. And in fact, indeed, it feels very much like a war with border controls and all of the rest of it. So let's just start by going through the presentation. And this is simply something or a way in which 360 Communities have addressed COVID-19 awareness campaigns and what we're actually doing in the communities that we manage. So clearly, the executive summary of this is it's really just to give you information on the precautionary measures undertaken by 360 Communities in our projects across the UAE and in Oman. In the UAE, we range from Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Ras Al Khaimah. And what we're trying to do to combat the transmission, flatten the curve, as it were, and to increase safety measures to ensure the health and well-being of our occupants and residents. So, first thing about the awareness campaign is clearly actually communication, making people in the communities completely aware of the war that we're fighting. So the first part of it was, and I think probably most communities immediately leapt into this, where we installed sanitizers in the common areas. We all became very aware of the information coming out about washing hands. And I think that, you know, all of us have seen the medical programs where people are scrubbing up before they go into surgery. And we've all become very familiar now with the 7 or 8 step manner by which we must wash our hands. And I know that for me, for 60 odd years, I've been doing it wrong. So we've learned how to actually do it. And so that was the first stage, really, is just an awareness campaign about just general sanitization, washing hands, because as we all know now, COVID-19 is generally transmitted by contact. And it's the contact that we're trying to break when we talk about flattening the curve or breaking the chain of transmission. So as part of what we've done, we've clearly all had to look at places where people congregate, talking about physical spacing or social distancing. I don't think they like the word social distancing, but physical distancing is probably more appropriate. So we've closed all of the community amenities, pools, gyms, spas, saunas, children's play areas, barbecue areas, all of the areas that in a building are common. Clearly, there's areas that can't be closed, such as the foyers, corridors, elevators, waste collection rooms, and those sorts of things. But the areas that we can control, by and large, and I think probably all of you in the industry will have done exactly the same, where you've closed those areas down. And again, most importantly, it's about communicating the closure so that people aren't left guessing. And they aren't wondering what they can and they cannot do. You've got to completely take the doubt out of people's mind about what they can and they cannot do and the places they can and cannot go to. Continuing sanitization and disinfection activities. We've obviously very much stepped up increased frequency and intensity of cleaning and disinfection inside all of the common areas in the community. So clearly we're looking at all of the areas where contact can be made, elevator buttons, waste collection rooms, in the elevators in general, the handrails, the grab rails, all of the stairwell rails, and anywhere where there are places that people can actually be conveying by contact what we don't want to be conveyed. So those have been very much stepped up. We've also looked at obviously sanitisation and disinfection of all common areas in the community in line with local authority standards and providing residents with an enhanced sense of safety. So if they can see that there are steps being taken, it really encourages them to see that, you know, we are caring for them, that clearly we're paying attention to the common areas. And in many cases, For those of you or us that have been unlucky enough or have had to face the prospect of having an infection in one of the buildings that we manage, there are municipality guidelines and rules which you must engage with regarding increased or intense sanitisation and disinfection. So social distancing, we talk about social or physical distancing, and I have seen photos of people who are actually carrying a 2-metre tape measure around with them to make sure that they keep a gap. By and large, if you've been to a supermarket or you've been to a place where people congregate, you'll see signs on the floor which indicate where you must stand. I still think this hasn't been done terribly well. I think that, where people will queue, particularly at checkout counters, it could be done a little better, but people are learning how to try and keep distance or use that physical distancing. Clearly, restriction of outside delivery personnel from going to the units, having to deliver to the reception from where residents collect, with exceptions clearly for those elderly occupants, pregnant ladies, and quarantined residents. Some of you, if you have a building, you may find that a resident who has been tested positive may not immediately be able to go to a hospital. And so that person, you may find, will be quarantined in their room or isolated in their room until such time as that can be done. So there are instances where you must assist these people who are residents in your community. There's two schools of thought on this. Jumeirah Lake Towers, for example, DMCC Master Community have actually put rules where they are treating the delivery teams as they come in, sanitising, taking ID, if they don't have masks or gloves, issuing them, and then allowing them to take a nominated elevator up to the rooms. And DMCC have taken the attitude that they want to help their community by making sure that they stay in their unit. And that's the way that they have dealt with it. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just simply saying that's the way that DMCC have chosen to deal with it. Again, extremely important, as with anything we do in community management, is clear communication. If you don't have clear communication, if you don't have open channels that you can talk to your residents, and it's not just your owners, clearly it's all the residents in the building, you're going to have people guessing or wondering what they can or they cannot do. So we all have notice boards in our buildings. We all, I would say, in this day and age, have web portals. We all have ways that we can communicate, whether it be through apps, phone apps, or whether it be through the web portals or by email or by SMS. And even if you just simply laminate and stick the signs inside your elevator. And those of the or high traffic areas. And those of you who know me over the years will know how much I love to see signs stuck on a wall, not. And so in these times, I think we can all accept that if a sign is laminated and it's stuck on the side of a wall somewhere, it's there for a reason, and we shouldn't get too antsy about it if it's conveying the message that we want to convey. Awareness, social distancing in elevators. So what we have done, not saying again that it's right or wrong, but it's certainly an assistance where we're limiting the numbers going into an elevator, and just to remove all form of doubt, we're actually putting a little drawing on the floor so you know exactly where you can stand. So in our case, we've limited to 4, and you can see clearly that we've indicated by design where they can stand in that elevator. Communication of safety measures. So we've seen a huge amount of information coming out from both the regulators and Dubai Municipality, from the National Crisis Management Committee. And if you're a member of the OA WhatsApp group, you'll see that members in that group have been regularly posting information that comes through. But for us, we've taken that and we've created notices like the health advisory you see on the left there. Important notices about enhanced hygiene measures, about sanitisation, cleaning, disinfecting. And there's an example there of one of our communities about what we've asked them to do in terms of not leaving their houses except for real emergencies and absolute necessities, which includes walking about the community, gathering it all, and we're just asking people to stay safe, stay indoors. In Dubai, clearly what they've done is they have put in 24-hour, not necessarily lockdown, but if you do go outside there, you must apply for a permit. You must have that permit as an SMS message on your phone to display if stopped. You must wear a mask, you must wear gloves. You're only allowed one person, I think it's one person in the car, but certainly if you're going to a supermarket, only one family member can go. So there's quite strict rules in place, and we must do our civil duty by making sure that our communities know what those rules are, and they're getting updated on a daily basis. So we must keep on top of the most current information. So we all have our maintenance staff. You know, these are the real warriors in the front line in terms of this whole campaign. These people are essential services in our buildings. They don't. We just can't stop maintaining or having people in our buildings. So we are taking steps to ensure that not only are they safe, but our residents are kept safe. So you see things like on the left, temperature measurement of, and if any of you have gone to a supermarket in Dubai, you'll know that you measured your temperature is taken as you enter the supermarket. We're getting obviously clearly mandatory. They must wear masks and gloves when on site. We're giving them briefings on how to handle emergency situations with residents. Again, that might be if there has been an infection in your building, how to handle that, and just generally making sure that they're on top of everything that has to be done in terms of the new reality that we face. What we have done, again, not saying it's right or wrong, but we've distributed hand sanitizers. This was actually in the very early stage of it, when we were all just starting to grapple with what we could do. And you will recall that there was a massive run on face masks and gloves and hand sanitizers, and there was price gouging, and there was all sorts of things going on. So we just simply bought hand sanitizers and made sure that we distributed them within the community. I think that now, you know, the supply chain is being solved in terms of necessary PPE like that, and it's no longer a requirement. But we felt it was important just to get the campaign going, to let people know that it was important. So again, communication, providing tenants, owners and residents with online channels, and redirecting all calls to 24/7 contact centre while closing community offices. So if you're like 360, you will find that many communities, you have on-site personnel in remote offices. So at the early stage, we actually took the steps of, for the most part, closing those offices. And to be able to do that, what we had to be absolutely sure was that we had taken the steps before that to provide all of the channels that people would need to either contact us or alternatively to make payments of service charges. So, you know, we developed things like a quick pay system online, and clearly you want to, if the option of visiting our offices on site has been closed down, you must have plenty of other options and other channels available for people to contact you and reach out to you for whatever reason. And part of that, for speaking again for 360, has been to work very hard on technology solutions, paperless solutions, and driving people to transact with us in a remote way rather than having to turn up to our office. And many of you will be very familiar with the early days in community management, where we would just have people queuing up in our offices with pocketfuls of cash wanting to pay their service charges. Well, you know, we've all gone a long way from that, and that's no longer a viable option. So it's very important to pay attention to those aspects of community management. So that's really the first part of the presentation is about specifically what 360 have done, and it's just a snapshot of the things that I'm sure that all community managers, certainly by looking at the WhatsApp group from OA Dubai, I could see that clearly many of these have been discussed. People have been talking about them, but just as a talking point, I'm here. You see that the question here is, what is the impact made by COVID-19 on community management? So this is a very general question, and I do have some talking points which I'll go through, but I think that, you know, when we think about a community, we think about, well, what are the sort of things that we would do in our day-to-day business? And we would definitely be having people coming to our offices. We've already talked about how we're dealing with that. We've talked about the impact it's had on our service providers, our maintenance teams on site. But then you need to think about things like, well, what about moving in, move out? How do people actually get in and out of the building if they've bought a unit or they're renting a unit and they've got all of their furniture to come in? What about contractors coming into the unit to do maintenance work? Because, as you know, someone's asking me to have a sip of water. Particular reason for that? Do I look dry? How about a cup of tea? So, okay, so I'll just start this off, but if you have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat box and we can talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
I think probably having a sip of water might be a hint that I'm talking too much, so feel free to jump in. Okay, so look, I'll kick it off. You know, the impact on community management. So let's just have a little look at the next slide, which gives us some talking points here. So as the UAE, and I know that there are people here from other countries, but it applies, as we continue to implement various safety measures to help prevent the spread of COVID-19, we need to now develop and can recommend long-term solutions aimed at combating this deadly virus along with other pandemics that are likely to happen in the future. So I think that's clearly the thing. We find ourselves in this situation now. There have been, in the past, we talk about the SARS epidemic, the MERS epidemic, which have nowhere near had the impact that we now have here. But this is really a training for the potential or the possibility of more. So what are the solutions, or what do we need to develop? Long-term solutions aimed at combating this deadly virus. And one of the things I think when we're talking about what is the impact on community management is the way that we are learning to work from home, as an example. Our remote working capability is clearly a massively important part of this whole equation. So if, like us at 360, we've been now working from home. This is the end of our second week. And for myself, what I have found is that productivity hasn't necessarily decreased, if in fact it may have increased. But what I've certainly found is that the communication that I'm having with my teams on site, with people that are reporting to me and the people that I report to, has vastly increased. So as an example, our management team, we are now meeting in the morning on a daily basis by online facility using Microsoft Teams, and we're actually spending a lot more time talking to each other now than we would have done had the office environment being the usual thing. Talking about how that might impact on the future, we can perhaps talk about that a little later, about how, as I said, this is our new normal, our new reality. So we would probably be looking at moving away from the way we have always worked in the past, and questioning the need for an office. Is there a need? Can we work without having to work in the conventional way? And then when you think about that, and you think about the impact that will have on the commercial owners and commercial landlords, just the whole environment of commercial leasing, it actually becomes a huge question. Looking furthermore through these talking points, the industry as a whole has become more aware of the situation that we're all facing, and currently on alert and making necessary changes needed to address the crisis. And a major lesson to be learned is that we have to be agile, pre-equipped and prepared to address the challenges, while also ensuring that operations are in continuity and maintained well. So if you think about that in terms of community management, I mean, the life's blood of every community is in fact service charge revenue. And if we are not issuing and collecting service charges, like even without the COVID-19 crisis, we find ourselves with buildings that are in crisis as a result of cash flow issues. So by being agile and pre-equipped, it means that we've actually set ourselves up to be able to work remotely. We've set our systems up so that our clients, our customers, can deal with us remotely. And we've tried to simplify the process of them, the payment channels for them, for example, but also communication channels. Something we don't like to blow our own trumpet, but I think many companies have taken the same route as we have. We had trial runs before this happened. We spent time actually working remotely to see how it worked, to make sure that all our systems were up and running. Many of us had to have VPN access so that we can get onto our own shared files and our own server bases. Our systems run through SAP, and of course, to get onto SAP, we need to have secure VPN access. So even just Microsoft Teams or Skype or Zoom, whatever it is that you use, you've got to make sure that these systems are all up and running. And you've got to make sure that you can actually work remotely from home should the need arise. And I think that, those companies that assess this risk and manage that risk are the ones that have really made the seamless transition from our conventional environment into an environment which is going to work. An example of this advanced preparedness can be seen in how we've already test-driven. I've just mentioned that. And it is also essential for the CM to have an emergency protocol in place. So this simply refers to, okay, we have social distancing, we have physical distancing. What if there is a fire? What's the impact of that? How do we deal with that? How are the authorities going to want us to change our process? We obviously can't have people congregating in groups outside a building that may have a fire evacuation for whatever reason. There's any number of things that could happen. You might have a potable water line break and dump water into the elevators. You might have elevator failures. We've all had those in the past. We've all learned how to deal with those. But the way we deal with them, given the current crisis, social distancing, etc., changes everything. And so you must review all of your emergency protocols, all of your standard operating procedures in light of our new reality. So, that was, if anything, again, you need to completely relook at the way you do business inside your buildings.
Great. I mean, just to, give a quick recap for everyone who's just joined us, Mr. Alan has taken us through all the initiatives that 360 Communities has implemented so far. And I must say, it's been a really interesting and very informative as well, the kind of initiations that you have taken. And we've also spoken about the kind of impact that COVID-19 has had on community management in general. Of course, as Mr. Allen stressed upon, this is the new normal right now, and communication is the key to go through all of this. Just to take you through the next question, Mr. Allen, what kind of operational impact is the industry facing now at this stage of the pandemic?
Okay, so I'll just scroll down to the next screen. Emergency protocols. Now, I already mentioned that. So, we have a whole bunch of standard operating procedures. Every community manager will have these, which is how do we handle emergencies? What do we do? How does the security team deal with the emergency? How do we escalate it? Who has to deal with it? And I've already said that. So from an operational impact, we must relook at all of our standard operating procedures, all of our protocols, and we need to do that because we have a need to manage the customer psychology to ensure stability and calm in the communities, ensuring operational continuity. So these buildings cannot just stand still. They all require maintenance. Even you think about, I've seen a lot of chatter about community facilities or amenities such as swimming pools and gyms, whereby some in communities have said, well, okay, I can't use the gym, I can't use the swimming pool, therefore I don't want to pay for it this year. And so, it's the classic, if anyone's done any M100 training with me, or if anyone has done any training with me at all, you'll remember the story I tell where you've got the little old lady who lives on the ground floor who doesn't use the elevator. And she says, well, I don't use the elevator, so therefore I shouldn't have to pay for it. So exactly the same thing applies here. The psychology of it is that whilst the swimming pool, the gymnasium or other common areas are unavailable right now, they still need maintenance. We just can't leave a swimming pool to stagnate and require a massive amount of money and time to bring it back up to speed once the crisis is over. So it's all about the psychology, how we deal with communities in terms of keeping them calm, making sure that they understand the need for a continuity of operations. And again, it comes down to communication, leaving communication lines open. You must absolutely be sure that if someone has a question, they can easily get hold of you and that you can actually provide assurances that they're looking for. Okay, Mega?
Yes. And also, if you can shed some light into some of the best practices one can actually initiate at these communities.
Okay, so let's talk about what support we can give to our clients. And of course, you know, when we talk about client stakeholders, principally we're talking about residents in the community. Residents, you could either be owners or clearly tenants. For us, they're one and the same. We have a contractual relationship with our owners by way of their requirement to pay service charges, but we also have a relationship with anyone in the community by part of our business. So clearly it's prompted us to realise the importance of being prepared and having an ability to respond, having to work closely with health authorities to stop the virus from infecting more people. That's breaking the chain, which is exactly what this whole quarantine or shutdown is about. We're looking at how it applies to freehold and leasehold communities. We play an important role in ensuring that each individual community and residents are prepared. And again, the most important action that the community manager can display is to stay calm, provide reassurance, and preventing mass panic or hysteria. I mean, we've got enough on our plates without having to have panic in any of our buildings. That's especially true if there is a case identified in the community. You don't want to be alarmist about it. You don't need a Facebook group to be going viral about, I have heard from somebody that so-and-so in such and such a house or unit has the virus, and therefore, everyone's out with their pitchforks and torches in the corridors. We don't need that to be happening. And the way we stop that happening is by being calm, providing assurances, providing fact, and making sure that communication lines are open. We must obviously make sure that the community is compliant. So we've got to completely keep up to date, make sure that we have access to all of the channels that are providing this information. I've mentioned the OA WhatsApp group, but we're also getting direct confirmation from the authorities, particularly the Dubai Crisis Committee. And every day, as I said, there's something new coming out. There was an instance actually at the very beginning of this in Gulf News that were reporting on what you could and you couldn't do, and it was actually quite ambiguous, and it raised more questions than answers, to be honest. And it took them about 2 or 3 days to come up or change their reporting to actually clarify exactly what you could and you couldn't do. So clearly, if you're communicating and your communications aren't clear and concise, you're going to create confusion. So you've got to make absolutely sure that there is no ambiguity in your instructions, and that's how you're going to keep people calm and make sure that they understand exactly what they can and cannot do. So despite the crisis, we need to maintain stability, continuity of essential community operations. And for example, everyone is urged to continue with regular daily routines like housekeeping, routine maintenance, etc. Although it has been a massive impact on all of our daily lives, the world does not just stop. It still keeps turning, and we've all got to be prepared in every way to make sure that we maintain that continuity for when we are going to be able to move out of this lockdown. And it doesn't end there either, by the way, because when we move out of this lockdown, we're going to have to understand, well, how do we do that? It's not just going to be a black and white. There's going to be steps that will have to be taken as we dial this back. There's clearly going to be border controls. There's going to be quarantine measures. There's going to be all sorts of things, which again will become our new normal. And that also applies to what happens within our communities. So awareness, the campaign, it's very, very important.
Also, just a kind of a sub question to that, Mr. Alan, like at this point of time, we also need to talk about how the FM team and the community management team need to work together as well. So if you could shed some light on that aspect as well.
So, the relationship between the FM provider and the community manager is probably the most important relationship in the building, to be honest. All of us in community management will know that in Dubai, the community manager has basically become the FM manager as well. The contracts sit with us, and so We don't see the FM provider as just simply someone who comes into our building from time to time and tightens up a few nuts and bolts and moves on. They become an integral part of our team. And so we have very heavy reliance on the service providers that we engage to be people who essentially become part of our team, if you like. So to give you an example of that, if you have an MEP contractor, it's mechanical, electrical, plumbing in the building, their supervisor reports to us. And he's a person that becomes very important to us because unlike the community manager who can't be in every building all day, every day, the FM team is. They're there 24/7. And so the relationship that we have with our maintenance teams is very, very important because they're the guys that are actually at the coalface. Also, we find that the core service providers, such as security, housekeeping, and MEP, are the people that are mostly managing the site, excuse me, in terms of contractors coming and going. So all of the specialist contractors that come and go in our buildings would not necessarily be managed on site by the community manager, although sometimes they are, but most likely it will be the contractor, the core contractor on site that will manage them on the site. And so we're very reliant on them. To give you an example, if there's pest control being done, it wouldn't be the community manager necessarily managing that process. It would be the security team or the FM team that would be managing that process. And so the relationship between the community manager and the FM manager is very symbiotic. It's incredibly important. And the way we treat it is we actually treat the supervisor team of each of the contractors we work with as being almost part of our team.
That's great. Now, moving on to the next question, what are the kind of proactive measures that can be taken to address the issue?
Okay, so so we'll just go through these points. So to protect the residents of the communities and employees, we're not experts or we're not the last word on this, but this is what we have done. We've deployed a clear response plan and taken proactive steps based on the guidance of local and global health authorities. Again, we don't do this in isolation. We do this in conjunction with the guidelines that have been provided to us by local and global authorities. We're raising people's awareness of staying safe during the pandemic. And everywhere you look now, it's, stay home, stay safe. It's written on the side of Burj Khalifa in more languages than one. And so clearly the message is stay home, stay safe. We're trying to avoid or break the chain by contact. So we've been conducting digital and on-site campaigns, regularly meeting with our staff members, working in various locations to keep all concerned updated on the latest developments and the newest government directives. We're trying, not to let anything slip through the cracks. We really want to make sure that everyone is kept informed and current with the situation as it changes. And in this way, we empower them to make the required precautions and informed decisions. And this also relates clearly to our relationship with our service providers. And in fact, we get feedback from them too to say, for example, security teams have been directed to do this, that, or the other, and they pass that information on to us. And we don't, as a community manager, do this in isolation. We clearly, if we have a security team on site, they will also have their corporate structure preparing standard operating procedures from them, which they would share with us. And so part of what they do becomes part of what we would do. So not everyone is the expert in this, as I said. So we're relying on the whole team to provide guidance and ideas on how to cope with this. Clearly, we've increased frequency of cleaning services to help ensure facilities and premises are well disinfected. And rest assured, that 360 Communities is prepared for any eventuality that may arise. Well, that's not just us, that's for everybody in the community. In addition to that, we're also promising to be transparent. Again, communication, customers, clients, and suppliers, anyone that is a stakeholder in these buildings that we manage, these communities that we manage. We're obviously having to tell them that we may need to the steps or the changes that need to be made to ensure continuity and uninterrupted. And that, the sorts of things I'm talking about there are the deliveries, move in, move out, any time where people need to come in or out of the building for whatever reason. And I think a lot of the questions that we see coming from the communities are just that. I am having a bed delivered. How do I deal with that? Or I'm moving in and I need contractors coming to my building. How do I deal with that? So I think that for the most part, people are very understanding about the changes that have to be made to deal with this new normal. So clearly you need to engage with the communities, alert them, kick off all activities to stay ahead of the curve, including installation of sanitisers, closing of community amenities. We've already covered that, and telling people why it's necessary to do that. And again, avoiding the issue of, well, if you're not using them, we're not paying for them. So, that's something that it's clearly an administrative issue, but it is an important one because it is about the cash flow that's required in the building to move forward. Restriction of outside delivery personnel from going to the units. They have to deliver. We've already covered that point. There are exceptions. Social distancing in elevators. Again, communication on safety measures, including personal hygiene, sanitisation. Again, the 8-step process for washing your hands. And I'm sure all of you, like me, have all of a sudden become very aware of how, you walk back into your house, you take your shoes off, and you go and wash your hands. So that's actually not a bad thing. So, there's some positive stuff to come out of this. So all of a sudden, we might not only break the chain of COVID-19, we might break the chain of the common flu and the cold by improving the way, we conduct ourselves at home. That was a thought that crossed my mind, actually. It may have occurred to other people in that, here we are, all of a sudden, worried about coronavirus, COVID-19 and transmission by contact. But most common ailments are transmitted by contact of some kind. So clearly, the steps that we've taken here will apply across the board to many, many other common ailments that we may suffer. So it's interesting to note that, just as the planet appears to be recovering without having humans running around in it, you may also find that, our general health and well-being may be improved as a result of the attention that we are paying from this coronavirus campaign.
Certainly a very positive way of looking at it.
Yeah. So, what we've done in our buildings also is we've put in thermal cameras. So clearly we're checking temperatures of everybody coming into the building. And in fact, that was the first thing I noticed. I travel regularly backwards and forwards to Oman, for example. Haven't been able to do so in the last month or so. But the first thing I noticed around about early and mid-March was that as I came out of the airport, they had thermal imaging cameras and they were checking temperatures of everyone coming out of the airport. And I thought, that was interesting. But now we're doing it in every building that we manage. We have cameras set up, quite sophisticated in terms of thermal imaging and checking temps. You've seen it in the supermarkets where you walk in the door and you immediately get a device thrust on your forehead to make sure your temperature is within the range it should be.
True.
Wearing gloves and masks. The jury is out really on the idea of masks. Some say that they actually transmit more than they protect. Masks, certainly there was a school of thought, and those of you that have done the MBRU Warrior test online, one of the things they did say was that, you should not be running around getting surgical masks because they really is necessary to make sure that the people who are in the front line are not prevented from getting them because of logistics and supply control. So, I think the whole logistics and supply chain has now been solved. We don't have to worry about that. And so the directive is, wear masks, wear gloves, and make sure that when you come home that they're removed they're removed in the proper manner. So, and we've all been given lessons on how to do that. So it's just become, again, the new normal for us.
True. Another thing that just comes up in my mind is, how can one actually instill faith among the residents or the occupants of the facility? I mean, I know for one, this long into the lockdown, I kind of think twice before letting anyone into the house. So as a community manager or as a service provider, what are the things that you can do to reinstill that faith?
Okay, so communication, which is the last point here, providing online channels, communication, etc. But I think that most of us have probably taken the view that we would rather not have someone coming into our house. And so, the thought of having a friend around, you just don't do that anymore. Whether it's a friend or an associate or somebody who is delivering something, you think twice about it. So it comes first from the individual inside the community. Now, clearly you're going to get people who don't feel that way, and to them it's more important to have the thing rather than the prevention. So it stops really at your increased security protocols at the building. So anyone who would come to the building that I live in, for example, or any 360 community building, would be stopped at the reception by security, and they will be held there. They're not just going to be able to walk willy-nilly into our community, just I'm going to visit so-and-so in unit 50, whatever. That's just not going to happen. And I think that the way you prevent that becoming a problem in your building is by clearly having that communicated beforehand. So 95% of that is going to be eliminated because our residents are very aware of it and would probably prefer not to have people coming in their home. They want to stay in their own bubble. They don't want to let anyone else come into that bubble. And for those who think otherwise, well, they're just going to find that security will not allow it to happen. We manage a large number of communities, and our call centre responses that we're receiving, we're not seeing a problem. And in the buildings we manage, we're not seeing that as being a problem. So I think that by and large, and I've said it before, I mentioned on the radio interview I did the other day, where people in the UAE seem to be pretty careful about following rules. By and large, I think that we're not a population of people, speaking from the expats, that willingly will go out and flout the rules that are put in place. And so I think that, we know we're all in this together, and that these changed rules and changed environments are for all of our good. And I think it comes around to the realization that it's not just about you, it's about everybody else. And so you're not actually putting yourself in harm by flouting the rules, you're putting other people in harm. And to give you an example of how that thinking is kind of flipped on its head, is I think about in my own home country, in New Zealand, for example, people were questioning, well, what can you and cannot and you cannot do. So can I go surfing? Can I go fishing? Can I go to the park and walk around the park? And there were all of those questions. And then they said, well, think of it this way. If you go out in a boat, you go fishing and you have an accident, immediately what's going to happen is you're going to have all of the emergency services have to come out to rescue you. So it's not about you, it's about everyone else that has to deal with what's happened to you. Similarly, driving cars, you have an accident. Well, the first thing that has to happen is all of the frontline people have to come out and rescue you. So you're putting them at risk. And I think that to flip the whole thing on its head, the realization from most people in our communities has been, well, it's nice to be in my bubble, but clearly I can see that if I flout the rules, that has an impact on many other people, not just me. And by increasing transmission, increasing the number of infections, it clearly puts our health services under massive strain. Just the number of beds available, our frontline personnel, and I mean you're seeing it in the US, where and in those other countries, Spain and France and the UK and everywhere, the massive strain on medical care and facilities. And, so it's not about us, it's about the whole community.
Sure. Moving on to the next question. Of course, we've already touched upon some of the best practices that, one can implement. Do you want to stress upon certain that we may have missed out on?
Well, a lot of it we've already talked about, but it doesn't hurt to go over and over and over, does it? Yeah. Excuse me. So this is, from our point of view, some of the best practices are obviously including stricter sanitation, implementation of social distancing. It helps to paste posters. Again, you remember, let's get too antsy about it. Let's make sure the message is more important than the method in strategic areas of the facilities. More than ever, technology, including contactless devices. I've already mentioned heat map detectors, thermal measuring in the foyers as people enter. A lot of the preparatory work, such as the move that we've made to automate many of our internal processes, eliminating paper use, as well as enable staff to work remotely. And again, this is interesting because it talks about, well, a lot of what we're doing as a result of this is actually improving a lot of things, improving wasted resources such as paper. Less paper, less trees. There's so much that we've been forced to do, which we would have liked to have done, but you couldn't really get people to embrace it. So as a result of what's been thrust upon us, we're being required to embrace change, which by and large is actually not a bad thing. And I'll be absolutely clear on this. A massive part of this process is going to be life after COVID-19. And, what's it going to look like? I don't think anyone can say what it's going to look like, but I know that my CEO, and we're communicating as a team on a daily basis now via Microsoft Teams, my CEO must be wondering, well, I wonder why we need to continue paying office rent when, so they're the questions that we're all going to start thinking about. Are we more effective working in a new way? Will it be maybe 3 or 4 days at home and a couple of days? Who knows? Where is this going to lead? None of us can say, but what I will say for absolutely sure is it's never going to be the same again. And these questions are going to be asked by every company and every disciple across the whole of the commercial world about how we operate. And, a consequence of that will be, we've seen the impact that online shopping has had to the typical high street retailer. And, this is just going to hasten that. The take-up of online shopping in the UAE is nowhere near what it has been in places where online shopping, such as the US, has been available. They talk about a 15% footprint of online shopping compared to the UAE, which is about 2 or 3%, I believe. So, you're going to see a massive, massive change in habit, a massive change in the way we conduct our business, and as individuals, a massive change in the way that we operate within our homes. Part of the automation process, for speaking for ourselves, is upgrading systems, upgrading to SAP HANA, which is transformed or streamlined our core back-end operations. We've also looked at things like centralizing processes, whereby we have integrated business services now, which are really a service provider to the group as a whole. So we have many different components in our group, but we have one centralized integrated business solution which serves all of those particular entities. And so there's going to be an awful lot of duplication taken out of the commercial world. So I think that probably the last part of this seminar, where we have another 10 minutes to talk, and I think that the last question we had is clearly, well, what is the plan of action post-crisis? And this is the big question, and this is the big unknown as well. We've been ahead of the game, and I'm sure we're not alone. Everyone's had to think about this, and everyone's had to think about equipping to work remotely. So we're not the only people that have done this. In cases that come up that were handled effectively and swiftly to mitigate any concerns from other residents, we had a plan of action. We worked on looking at potential what we would need to do. Post-crisis, have our existing crisis management emergency plan enhanced to include pandemic. So what it's taught us is that where we had a crisis management plan, and I know that within our company we've had it for the last 18 months to 2 years, where we have a standard practice to enter into should a crisis hit us. And I can be honest to say that we hadn't actually factored in the thought of a pandemic. So what it's done to us as a company is it's meant we've had to relook at our own crisis management plans, because this has been the biggest crisis we've ever faced. And it wasn't something that 18 months ago we'd even really thought about. We were thinking about fire, earthquake, whatever, but not pandemic. So we've had to make those changes. We need to evaluate a course of action according to the latest developments to be better equipped, better prepared, and the sparkling realization that whatever you think is going to happen may not necessarily be the thing that's going to happen, and you need to be agile, and you need to be able to move quickly. It's like the story of Kodak, really, isn't it? Kodak had one of the best businesses, been in business for 100 years, went out of business in the space of about 6 to 8 months with the advent of electronic cameras, or forgive my terminology, I'm only a poor old boomer, I'm not a millennial, but all of those companies that were cumbersome, that relied on one product, one idea, when technology moved on, they were left behind. Well, if you think about us as companies and in this whole pandemic, the world has moved, it's shifted, and if you're not agile enough to deal with that, you're not going to be agile enough to survive in the marketplace. And think of the airlines, think of all of those service industries that have had their market just completely taken away from them, and they've entered a new world, and the talk is that many airlines are not going to survive this. So we're going to see a massively changed tourism industry, a massively changed airline industry, a massively changed industry in maybe the cafe, the food and beverage industry, hotel, anything related to tourism is going to be. We'll see changes in patterns internationally where people will travel overseas for holidays. They'll maybe stay at home now. So what is life going to look at after? It's just I think all of us know that probably the biggest impact is going to be the impact on workspaces, how we think about how we deliver our service. Is there a need for on-site offices? Do we need to have an office where people can come? Why would they come to an office? We need to be questioning all of those things that we previously accepted as being normal and typical. And you question, well, why do we have the office? Is it somewhere that people can come and they can ask us a question about their service charge? Well, they can do that online. They can do that through a call centre. They can do that through an app. Is it a place where they come with a bucket full of cash to pay their service charge? Well, we just don't accept cash anymore. We don't have a cashier's office anymore. And so that's fine to do that, as long as you've taken the effort and the steps to make sure that there are plenty of other viable channels for people to make payment, so they're not going to be disrupted. I noticed today that in the news that the banks have stopped issuing cash for cheques, ADCB I think it was, and so they're saying that people don't bother coming into our branch to cash a cheque. It's just not going to happen. And that was one of the remarkable things. I think everyone else that's come into this country was shocked at the reliance on cheques. I mean, when I came from my country, cheques were no longer used. People didn't use them at all. And I think that the UAE is rapidly having to rethink how we conduct payments. And so the idea of people paying service charges by cheque and cash now is almost gone.
True.
If anyone has questions, sorry, feel free.
That's. I was just going to say that if anyone has any question, we do have about 5 to 10 minutes left. Do write in your questions. And something that just comes to my mind now, Mr. Alan, is also regarding training. So, what kind of insight can you give us at this point of time? How do companies provide the kind of training that they can?
Sure. So at ALS 360, we've always placed a huge emphasis on training, both internal and external. So what this is actually, we've seen this as an opportunity actually to step up training. So clearly, and I'm not saying that, you know, we didn't work hard when we were in offices, but I think everyone will agree that, you know, you find you do have some time on your hands. And so what we've tried to do is to think, well, okay, we have this time available. We have all of these channels, these remote work from home channels now. So we've got the perfect opportunity to step up training. So what we're doing is we're setting up various training alternatives for people to check into. So, you know, your webinar is a classic example of the opportunity for people to learn through online learning. I think that, you know, interestingly, there have been organisations in the past that have excelled in online learning before this even came about. And I'm thinking of the likes of INSEAD, an international school for online education. And they are excellent resources for online learning that many of our management team have taken over the last 2 years. And some of them actually went out of the country for a week to do online learning at their facility, but most of us just did it online. And then all of a sudden, all of the school, everyone is working remotely, everyone is teaching from home. And again, you're looking at university campuses and thinking, well, okay, so the lecturer is effectively communicating with all of his students, probably even more so online than he would have standing in front of a blackboard with a piece of chalk and a duster. And so all of a sudden, is there a need for a university campus? Is that a requirement? What I'm seeing on the screen in front of me is a interactive training or learning program. And it enables people to work differently. You know, all of a sudden we don't have to go to a lecture at a university at 10 a.m. in the morning, and if we turn up late, we miss it. You know, the options for learning and we're working at the timetable completely change for us. So education and learning is going to be one of the massive sea changes that we are going to see as a result of this. And I think, again, you know, I can't emphasize enough that as we come out of this, everything is going to be, there'll be nowhere to hide, really. Everything is going to be questioned, and the way we do business, everything will be different from the way that we have conducted ourselves in the past.
True. Any questions? If anyone has, we have a couple of minutes left.
So I saw one gentleman was talking about, well, should we chew vitamin C tablets? I think that absolutely, vitamin C is very good for you. I'm not going to promise it's going to cure COVID-19, but certainly live healthy.
Great. On that note, I think I would like to thank you, Mr. Alan, for taking time out for us and for 360 Communities for supporting us in this webinar. Now, it certainly has been a very informative session for all of us and a positive one. I mean, there's so much to look out for and look forward to as well, as you rightly pointed out, Mr. Alan. And there's definitely an immense amount of work that is happening in the background. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the industry for their efforts, your dedication, your passion, your commitment, which is making a huge difference to all of us. Now, on a more positive note, I truly believe we can beat this, and hopefully the world will come out of this much wiser and a much more aware as we move forward. I'd also like to remind everyone the webinar will be up on the CM Today YouTube channel. We'll be coming out with more such interesting sessions. Do follow us on our social media pages and to get regular updates. So until then, let's all work towards breaking this curve, as they say, and stay safe. Thank you so much, Mr. Alan, for joining us this morning.
Thanks for the opportunity, Vega. My pleasure. And as you just said, stay safe, everybody, and let's just break the chain.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, very good.